Hi everyone, I'm Rohan Jha, a product manager for the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability team. It's my pleasure to be here with you today to discuss value chain calculations in Microsoft Sustainability Manager. I'll be talking about the ESG value chain solution, which can help your organization increase transparency and collect more reliable and accurate information from suppliers and value chain partners. In this session, I'll specifically focus on the calculations with value chain data. For a more general summary, there's also a tech talk on this topic, which we'll link. I'll first go through the challenges that we're hearing from our customers and that we're aiming to solve. Then I'll walk through the solution itself, and then I'll demo the end-to-end customer journey and the calculations in Microsoft Sustainability Manager. And finally, I'll end with FAQ and some resources. Starting with the challenges. Scope 3 emissions account for a significant percentage of most organizations' emissions. For example, over 2/3 of Microsoft's total emissions are from the value chain. But organizations need primary data in order to measure not only their emissions, but also their reductions over time, as shown by this image adapted from EcoAct in the Pathfinder framework. If I'm using industry averages, which are the left two boxes, I might not be able to understand the impact of changing a supplier or swapping out a material. However, as this diagram shows, using primary data takes time and effort. There are a few main roadblocks with moving to primary data. Number one, the list of value chain partners can be quite extensive for large organizations, and it can be hard to get data at the required granularity. And number two, once an organization has this data, it can be difficult to integrate into the carbon accounting process. We've built the ESG value chain solution to help solve these challenges for our customers. The solution contains a supplier survey tool called the ESG Value Chain Portal and features within Microsoft Sustainability Manager for managing suppliers and surveys and working with the data collected from suppliers. The portal is built on Power Pages and the Power Platform, so the data is automatically available within Dataverse and Microsoft Sustainability Manager. The value chain solution is currently in use by Microsoft's procurement team to collect granular data from over 1,000 suppliers, and we've incorporated many of their learnings into the product. I've also included a quote from a supplier about their positive experience with the ESG value chain solution. I'll now walk through the solution end to end. I'll set up my supplier data and my surveys within Microsoft Sustainability Manager. Then my supplier will respond to the survey. And finally, I'll work with the data I've received from my suppliers. We'll focus in depth on this final part in this session. To set the context, we're a coffee company requesting data from our suppliers. We want to move from more general estimates of Scope 3 emissions to working directly with our suppliers to help them reduce their emissions. We'll need more granular Scope 3 calculations using primary data to track whether these efforts are effective. To start, I'll navigate to the value chain section and the accounts page to view the details for each of my suppliers or value chain partners. I can also ingest this information from other systems if I'd like. Next, I'll set up a survey to collect information from these suppliers. I've already started configuring this survey, 2023 all data. I've linked it to my supplier portal. I've also indicated the reporting start and end dates that I'm requesting data for, and in the data to request field, I've entered that I want activity, emissions, PCF, and factor data from my suppliers. And then I've defined which factor library to associate the partner factors with, and finally, which scopes and categories of activity data to collect. We enable suppliers to submit their activity data in case they aren't able to compute their emissions. Factor and PCF information can also help suppliers share their carbon impact without providing sensitive data. Next, I've selected which suppliers to send this survey to. I can select either an individual supplier or a group of suppliers. Now I'll switch to the point of view of the supplier. I won't go in depth here, as the focus will be on the calculations. As a supplier, I've gotten an invitation code from my customer, the coffee company, and I've created an account in the supplier portal. I can view the surveys I've been assigned here. And I can view the status and when each of these were sent. I can then click into this survey, 2023 all data, and view my submission. I've entered revenue information, and I've used the provided Excel template to bulk upload activity data. I've also entered factor information and PCF information. The Excel template gives me information about how to format my data and makes it easier for me to submit a lot of data at once. Now, fast forwarding and switching back to the coffee company. I can view the survey results here in the Surveys tab. These results contain the responses to each of the questions, as we can see here in the General tab and the Survey Answers tab, and also references to the activity data that I just provided as the supplier. At this point, we very quickly cover the survey setup and the supplier experience. Now we'll get to the main part of the demo, the value chain calculations, or what I can now do that I've collected this data from my suppliers. To recap, we've collected 3 types of data from our supplier: activity data, factor data, and PCF data. And as the supplier, we have the option to submit emissions data as well. A quick note that we don't necessarily expect customers to use all of these at once. I'll now go through how each of these data points are represented in Microsoft Sustainability Manager, and how we'll use the calculation engine to convert these data points to emissions data, which is the end goal here. Now let's go through the flow for supplier activities first. To view all the activities, not just those from the supplier, we'll click into Value Chain and Partner Data. Our end goal will be to compute the emissions that we are accountable for from these activities. For this demo, though, just to keep things simple, we'll focus on these first 4 activities for purchased electricity that we submitted previously using the Excel template. Our supplier has entered their electricity consumption for 2023, including information like the geographic area. Our first step will be to compute the partner's emissions using the partner's activities. We'll navigate to the calculation models. We'll go to the value chain models. And here we'll find models for each activity type. We click into the purchased electricity model. And we note here that it's making the same calculation as our standard purchased electricity calculation model for normal non-partner activities, multiplying the quantity of electricity by an emission factor that's based on the geographic area of the consumption. We'll run this model with the profile. And after waiting a second, we'll now also navigate back to partner data to view the result of the calculation. We now have partner emissions for our partner activities. Clicking into the record, we note that we have a CO2e value for our partner emission. We're not done yet, though. We have the Scope 2 emission for our supplier, but we need the resulting Scope 3 emission for our own organization. To do this, we'll run a second calculation model to attribute these emissions. I'll navigate back to Models, back to Value Chain, and select External Emissions. I want to note that these next steps are also applicable if I've directly collected emissions data from my suppliers, either with the portal or through some other process. Now I'll click into this model I've created. In the second step, we're using revenue data to attribute these emissions, in particular the proportion of the supplier's total revenue that comes from our spending. These values are coming directly from the supplier's survey response. In the final step, I indicate the Scope 3 category that I want these emissions to be counted under, which in this case is Scope 3 Category 1, Purchased Goods and Services. We'll run this model with the profile as well. Now let's navigate back to the survey and view the revenue data. Here we see the supplier has submitted that we, the customer, spend $500,000 out of a total revenue of $9 million. So our Scope 3 emission attributed to our organization should be around 5% of the partner's Scope 2 emissions. Now let's go to all emissions to find the final emission value. The final CO2 value has been correctly calculated, and this emission is within Scope 3, Category 1, Purchase Goods and Services, as expected. To summarize the whole journey, we've received a supplier survey with their activity data and computed the resulting emissions and then attributed these to a Scope 3 category under our organization. Throughout, we've used the calculation model so we can customize this as needed. Now, if we go back to our survey, we remember that we also collected product footprint and factor data. For some customers, it might be easier to account for value chain emissions by looking specifically at the products they've purchased and the emissions that have gone into each product. Factor data allows for this at the spend type level, and product footprint data allows for this at the more granular product level. We'll start with product footprint data, which is captured within the product footprint table. Here we click into the Arabica footprint submitted previously, and our supplier has provided the emissions required to produce 1 pound of blonde roast coffee. For factor data, I'll navigate to Factor Libraries and to the Value Chain Factor Library. And here I can find the factors my suppliers have uploaded and the mappings that are automatically generated. Each factor is mapped to the supplier and to the spend type the supplier provided on the survey. Now, to make this all clear, let's walk through a calculation. I'll head over to my activity data and to Purchase Goods and Services, where I've stored the goods I've bought from each supplier. Here, I'll click into this record, which contains my order for Arabica beans for my supplier, the bean distributor. This contains the amount of beans that I've bought, and I've also made sure to connect this order to my supplier, bean distribution, and to the product footprint that I've received from my supplier. And we can see that here. I also have indicated the appropriate spend type on the record, and that will help me connect this purchase goods and service activity to the right factor. Next, I'll head back to the calculations and to the purchase goods and services calculation model. I'll go to the second step, and here for illustration, I've selected my value chain factor library, and I've indicated to use the account, which is the supplier, and the spend type to map from my purchase goods and services record to my factor. Alternatively, I can use the supplier provided product carbon footprint and select that here instead, and select the right value to use from the product footprint record. Let's do that and save the model. And now again, we'll go to Profiles to run the model. If we head to the All Emissions page and find the appropriate emission, we'll find that we've correctly multiplied the quantity of product by the product footprint value. Okay, to this point, we've covered how to use supplier data, activities, emissions, PCFs, and factors to compute emissions. We'll end by showing how this emissions data is integrated with the analytics within Microsoft Sustainability Manager. Heading to the Emissions Insights page, and to the Scope 3 page, I can now view my Scope 3 emissions for each category by account or supplier. And like the other dashboards, I can configure this view further with deeper supplier-specific views, and I can slice these as needed. Now back to the deck. To summarize, we've walked through how we can use the ESG value chain solution to manage supplier information, conduct surveys, and in particular, compute Scope 3 emissions for 4 types of supplier data: activities, emissions, PCF, and factors. And to highlight a few takeaways. Number 1, you can integrate primary supplier data, either from the portal or not, into your existing calculations in analytics. Number 2, based on your and your supplier's preferences, you can attribute their emissions or activities, or use their factors or PCFs directly in your calculations, or a combination of both approaches. And number 3, because value chain calculations are within the calculation engine in Microsoft Sustainability Manager, you can extend the solution to fit your specific needs. Next, I'll go through a couple of frequently asked questions. First, on pricing. The solution is included with Sustainability Manager Premium. Second, in terms of other dependencies, the solution also requires Power Pages capacity, and this month we'll start including 2,000 authenticated users with a premium sustainability license. Finally, on configurability. As we discussed, many aspects of the survey process are configurable using both Power Pages and other solutions within the Power Platform, and we'll be coming out with a docs article soon with more details here. I'll end with a few more resources for you all. First, we'd love your feedback on this session, and there's a link here for you. Second, as I mentioned earlier, we also have a tech talk on this topic. Much of the content is similar, but that video focuses more on the survey setup and the supplier experience. And finally, we have links as well to our technical documentation and the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability community. With that, I want to thank you for your attendance today. We're looking forward to seeing how you'll leverage the solution to measure and reduce your value chain emissions.